and keep that front and center. And I think if anything else, that's what the message the Senate is sending, is that they're going to make sure that this does get, a priority in terms of attention, and that's certainly making it SB1 will do that. So,
and I apologize, I wasn't prepared. Let me slightly back up. I think most everyone in this room knows it, but let's still do it appropriately. We have Dr. John Zerwas, who is from Fort Bend County. You say Fulshire now, or?
Katy, Richmond, Fulshire, yeah, kind of the whole place now.
And has been on appropriations for several sessions and knows the budget inside out, has been on conference committee. We have Representative Otto, who has been on appropriations for numerous sessions, been on conference committee, and is from Dayton, correct?
Yep.
And then, of course, Representative Darby from San Angelo, who has also been on appropriations for numerous sessions. And then, I don't know why Tan Parker is here, because
We're glad to have you.
Tan, are you even on appropriations?
I'm not.
Okay. Tan is here to give you the perspective of the rest of us who are not on appropriations and how we view the poor souls that put those hours into the budget. But we're lucky to have Representative Tan Parker, who is at Flower Mound.
That's right.
From Flower Mound. So appreciate having them all here. Let me ask, a lot of discussion on ending diversions, particularly the gas tax and those types, but are there other diversions and other mechanisms that are within the budget that should be considered, maybe that we have done in the past that maybe need to go away?
We started the process last session under HB 7 and John carried HB 6 with taking a look at our GR dedicated accounts. We had over the past 20 years adhered to a practice of taking the money that was accumulated through various fees and other taxes designed to support a specific state purpose, and we collected them for that purpose, and we didn't spend them for any other purpose, but we didn't spend all the money that was collected. And so that had grown from some $200 million early on to over $5.1 billion. And so we said, that's got to stop. We've got to bring truth in taxation and transparency. And we want to walk back from that practice, and we did so under House Bill 6. So we set the limit at $4.1 billion, and we've adhered to that. My bill, HB 7, took a look at all of those general revenue dedicated accounts and said, where can we cut fees? And we did so. We eliminated the system benefit fund, the discount for low income, the users of electricity, and so we were able to cut about $1 billion out of that fund and reduce that and eliminate that tax altogether. We looked all across the budget and other GR dedicated accounts and said we're going to either cut the fees or fully appropriate the money out of the account or eliminate the collection of those fees. And so we did that, and we're going to have the privilege, I believe, this next session of filing HB 7, which I will carry. We'll take a look at another $1 billion in either tax cuts or spending out of the general revenue dedicated accounts. I'm sure John will have a bill which will further set that target much lower than the $4.1 billion. So it's an effort to make sure that if we collect money for a specific purpose, we actually spend that money. We've taken a lot of the low-hanging fruit, to tell you the truth, and now we're going to get back into some pretty difficult and in-depth study of those general revenue dedicated accounts and try to bring the collection of those fees more in line with what is an appropriate level of funding, and so we look to do that. And, this will be a process of listening. Every one of those accounts has a stakeholder that has an interest in that account. Once you start affecting that stakeholder's budget, it becomes important to them, and they let us know of that. So that's one way that I believe we'll have another $1 billion in effort on top of what we've already done in order to bring the general revenue dedicated accounts more in line.
Let me just add that House Bill 6 will probably be what's called the Funds Consolidation Bill. And that's basically, Chairman Darby and I work sort of in tandem. He's accomplishing either the reduction of the fee, using the money in the manner it is supposed to be used. On the other side of the equation, my job in House Bill 6 is going to be, some of those dedicated funds need to keep their balances. there's a purpose for why that money was collected, and it may be in such a situation that it's not wise to appropriate all the money at one sitting. So what my goal will be in the funds consolidation bill is say, okay, in order to get we went from 5 billion down to 4, in order to get to where we only use 3 billion of those balances, I will have to carve out the accounts that I do in House Bill 6 that says these funds cannot be consolidated and taken into account, these balances. So that's how we'll achieve that, because as Chairman Darby said, he's already grabbed the low-hanging fruit, so now it gets a little more difficult, but the goal will be to just limit again. So I think we're both dedicated to seeing another $1 billion come off this session in the funds that are used for certification.
Dr. Zerwas, you know the budget inside and out, but one of the areas that you would put a lot of energy and effort into has been healthcare, public health area. If you could talk a little bit about where we're headed this session and what the effect of a lot of the federal legislation that we've seen over the last several years. And I guess the bigger issue I would ask you to talk about is that historically, the legislature has always wanted and has always had education to be the #1 priority and the #1 funder. But some of the drivers, Mr. Hammond, some of the drivers on healthcare that's making that a harder challenge for us to not let healthcare get in front of education.
Right. Thanks, Dennis. It is a place I spend a lot of time. If we look at where the budget from the House side comes in at this time, it's about $75.6 billion is what we project or offer up to spend. The education is about 76.3, I think. So it's a pretty slight difference right there. I think it was certainly intentional that we keep education above health. But this biennium, we saw that it came in essentially even, if not surpassed at the end of it all. I think we need to watch it pretty close. But the bottom line is the majority of Article 2 is the big entitlement beast called Medicaid. It's a cash-hungry beast. It takes the money in because you have to fund it. We're seeing more people come to the state of Texas, and that's going to bring a certain amount of Medicaid. A number to kind of keep in mind, 60% of all babies are born into the Medicaid system. 60%. That is a huge amount of poverty that when you stop and look at it just from that perspective. We're seeing more people into the Medicaid program as a consequence of the ACA. Some of the rules that were changed allowed for more people to go in. We're seeing a shift of some kids out of CHIP into Medicaid, again an ACA thing that happened as a consequence of that bill and stuff. So we're seeing the program grow. This budget does allow for the increase in enrollment that we see in Medicaid. We typically don't include the cost increases in there. We do a whole number of things typically to try to rein in the cost. And I think for the most part, a lot of those things are in fact working. If we look at what the shortfall in Medicaid is this time, we're probably looking at about $170 million that we have a shortfall. Remember just a couple sessions ago, we were looking at a $4 billion shortfall. We understand why that happened because we only funded Medicaid for 19 months, not 24 months. And so we knew that was going to be a bill that we would have to bear when we came back in 2013. We did, and in this session we are looking at essentially keeping up with the growth in the Medicaid program, and anticipate the various cost savings measures will help us try to rein in what some of those costs are. I do have a concern that in fact, because this program is an entitlement program, and we have really squeezed a lot of the costs out by moving into managed care and a variety of other initiatives, that we can see the Medicaid program surpassing the educational needs from a pure resource point of view. That's not uncommon in other states. Other states, in fact, have been there for a long time. And so Texas has been very, very conscientious about making sure we handle these dollars prudently. But we are seeing some increases in those particular areas. A few highlights of what our introduced budget has in it is we spent a fair amount of money increasing mental health resources last time. That money is in the base budget. We also added some money to help take care of some of the women's health services and needs that were out there. Those monies are all baked into the base budget as it's introduced. And so, we're starting at a place where we ended last time. We didn't cut back on that. As we go through the process here, we'll determine what additional needs there are out there, or if in fact there are things that we can kind of rein in and cut back on. But I do think that in order for us to ultimately rein in the Medicaid program, we got to look at how we're paying money out and start to look at quality and cost effectiveness as part of the metrics in terms of how we pay. And we need to look at really just some of the things that are very, very prudent in terms of promoting responsible behavior in healthcare. Part of that is getting waivers for some of the things like having reasonable co-pays, incentivizing the right kind of behaviors that we want to incentivize. These are things that require waivers from the federal government to make happen. But we need to be about trying to incorporate those things into our Medicaid program. And I know there's a number of interests and activities out there that are trying to, in fact, move in that direction.
Very good. Gentlemen, Mr. Otto, Mr. Darby, Mr. Parker, would you like to talk about Medicaid for a few minutes?
Rather not.
You just heard from the expert.
I understand, but I mean, there are a lot of things obviously that we need to look at in that area. I apologize for my tardiness, but William P. Clements Jr., some of us remember him. When he ran for office, he said it's time to build a fence between the hog and the trough. And I think that you, fine gentlemen, have done a pretty good job of that. At the same time, some people have a somewhat different view, shall we say, of the budget in Texas. I just ask each one of you to comment. Are you truly profligate spenders, or are you pretty tight with the buck? And what is your view of the House proposal when you talk about the proposal in general?
Well, in San Angelo, I'll take a cue off your comment. We say the more slop in the trough, the more hogs tend to show up. And Texas, as John indicated, we have a bountiful budget, and we'll have about $14 billion in cash available with the surplus ending in 15. With it brings challenges. How do we take care of the growth in Texas? How do we plug some of the holes that we had dug in previous biennium, whether it be in TRS care, whether we ERS, some of the programs responsibilities we have for our retired and active teachers. How do we satisfy that? How do we maintain the state's infrastructure? How do we maintain the highway infrastructure that we become known throughout the country as having the best infrastructure in this country? How do we maintain that and yet provide for fiscal responsibility and if appropriate, give tax cuts? So I think we've done a good job in the introduced budget in the House. I think we've satisfied the growth. We have plugged some of the holes. We've continued some of the programs that are working. We have provided for additional border security funds. We kind of tailored that effort in a little different fashion than we had. We've introduced cameras to the equation, and so I think it's a responsible introduced budget, and I stress introduced budget. That's exactly what it is. It's something that I know the three of us and a lot of LBP staff and Chairman Pitts over the last several months have been working very hard to provide us a starting point. And this is a starting point that we can initiate discussions about what have we missed, what have we short-sighted, what have we spent too much money on, and that's what the process is all about. We now have a session in which we have 150 members, and those 150 members will have an opportunity to weigh in on that budget and tell us about their priorities, and hopefully we can come up with a bill that passes out of the House that reflects the needs of the state.
You're going to save us some money on prisons?
Absolutely. Well, I'm the non-appropriations person here, but I just want to comment, first of all, that what a great job the three of these gentlemen have done historically in past sessions, and I have every confidence that we'll have a very conservative budget here. As you've already seen in the introduced version, I'm very proud of what we did last session. I'm very proud of what we'll do this session. And I think it will honor our commitments, right? I think it will honor the major obligations and priorities of Texas. And when it comes to the question you asked earlier, Bill, with regard to Medicaid and obviously education and so forth, John, I think, very articulately spoke to finding that balance. I, for one, and I think all of us agree here around this table and all the membership, at least on the Republican side, that we want education to be the higher priority, and that we can't, in my mind, allow the growth, if you will, and some of those health and human services programs to exceed what we're putting in place in terms of education funding. Education, both higher ed as well as K through 12, has to be our highest priority as a state and as a people. And so I'm very proud of the budget that's been introduced and look forward to the process.
Mr. Otto, if I could just to interject before you begin, as I understand it, the House budget is about $8 billion below the cap, and the cap is about $7 billion below the estimate. Is that correct, sir?
That would be approximately correct, yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, there's more money than we can spend under the cap. So I was just gonna say, when you talked about your original question about, how have we done, if you look at any of the stats on where Texas stands on its spending, I don't care if it's per capita, per student, any way you wanna measure it, we're a very conservative budget state. We always have been. One of my concerns as we go into this is, for example, I don't think anybody would deny that transportation is probably one of the highest priorities going into this budget session, even with the constitutional amendment passing. And there's several bills out there. One is to take the sales tax off automobiles and dedicate that money for highways. That sounds good. Why would anybody oppose that? I'll probably even come around to supporting it, but here's my concern. And unless you've served on appropriations or Senate Finance, you're really not going to get attuned to this. We currently have discretion over about 17% of all the dollars that are in the budget. The other 83% is stipulated by Constitution, by statute, by formula, by federal match. So you walk in to do a budget, and 83% of it is pretty much already determined. The three of us were on a panel at the Equity Center, and I told the members there Sunday, I said, if we keep doing this, pretty soon we won't have to show up to write a budget because it'll all be decided by the dedication. There was slight applause in the audience on the fact that we might not have to come up here. But I think, that, and I say that to say this, I think dedicating money is fine if it is a core function of government and it's a high priority. But when was the last time we went back and looked at dedications that were done 20 years ago? Because those priorities 20 years ago may not be the same priorities we have today. And I just think that both bodies, House and Senate, need to keep that in mind when we're looking at how are we going to address the priorities today. I think we need to go back and look at where are we dedicating money that we shouldn't really be dedicating it.
Big Mike, I think another part of just what's going to overshadow our conversations, and that even though the comptroller has come in with the biannual revenue estimate that he did, the fact is oil is still, significantly depressed. And if you read any number of things, some will say it's going to stay there for a while, but others will say, well, it will rebound up to more of what I think the comptroller is basing his estimate on. But for the few months that we're here looking at this budget, that is going to always be, I think, a cloud over our head as we think about, what should we or should we not be spending. And oil continues to be a very, very big part of our economy, jobs, not to mention some of the royalties and so forth that we get. But I think that's something that as we go through this process, if the price of oil continues to stay depressed during our deliberations, that to some extent is going to impact that, not just us, but I think the entire legislative body.
So I would ask each one of you this question. Do you think that the comptroller may have overdid it a little bit?
Since I just heard him at lunch explain this, I would say no, not currently. Because here's the understanding. What he's looking at, he already had basically about 8 months in his hip pocket where oil had basically come in already at $80 a barrel. So when he says he used an average of 64, he's allowing for a lower price for a certain period of time in order to average 70 or 64 when the first 8 months came in at 80. So now, is there concern? Yes, I think Dr. Zerwas is exactly right. If it hasn't trended back up a little bit by the time we leave here in May, there's going to be a lot of us that are going to be a little concerned about how long is this going to last.
Mr. Darby?
And it has a multi-layered effect. While severance taxes would go down, therefore Prop 1 money put in Fund 6 will go down. the fact is that everybody in this room is able to have more change in your pocket because of reduced expense of filling up your cars. Well, what's happening is you're traveling more and you're buying more things, you have more disposable income, and we make more money on sales taxes than we do on severance taxes. So while the price of oil is certainly concerning and we need to watch that, what's really important is what it'll have on employment, especially out in my part of the world. There are stacking drilling rigs. Rig counts are going down dramatically. They're laying off crews every day. That relates to service-related industries. Every service-related company has been informed that they'll either reduce their overall cost by 30% or they will not continue to work for the majors.
Sure.
That results in layoffs in service-related industries, consolidation, lack of travel, less hotel, motel. I mean, less folks at the Dairy Queen. I mean, it has a ripple effect. So that's a very complex economic picture that we'll just have to wait and
Less
see.
people buying tricked out 150, F-150 trucks.
Well, I think one of the things that's very important for us all to remember is that the Texas economy is much more diverse today than it was in the 80s, right? I mean, in the 80s, we were so dependent on oil and gas. Today, we're much more balanced in technology and new growth in biotech and manufacturing and textiles and so on and so forth, and of course, our strong service economy. So I think if you look at the picture as a whole, no question our perspective on the future of Texas is very, very bright, but this is a very concerning issue and something we need to watch very, very closely. But I think, personally, my perspective is probably a 12 to 18-month period where we'll see it be down. But I also see there's huge upside on the other side of this, so to speak, right? And so when you think about the fact that Texas is producing the level of oil and gas that it is today, I think it's got huge upside potential for the Texas economy in the decades to come. As we look at changing, if you will, the dynamics of the oil economy globally and getting away from traditional models with OPEC and look to potentially the opportunities of a North American, if you will, organization with Texas being a driving force here for North America.
So, Mr. Darby, yesterday we were talking about going ahead and appointing the conferees and then recessing for 90 days and then coming back and voting on the budget. That would save the state a lot of money. Any thoughts on that?
I think I laughed at your proposal.
Okay.
Still do.
Seriously. Okay, roads, obviously you, as well as the others, but you more particularly had a focus on road funding. Tell us what the House budget is doing for road funding for the coming biennium.
Well, everyone here understands the issue of, quote, diversions. That's simply allowing state agencies that have a legitimate purpose, policing of our roads, to be funded out of the Fund 6, which is derived through gasoline taxes and through registration fees. And so we've been funding DPS primarily out of Fund 6, and they have policing authority on our roads. I think there's a connection with our roads, and so we thought it appropriate to fund them out of Highway 6 dollars. We're going to stop that practice. We're funding DPS out of general revenue. All the other state agencies, whether it be SOA or Department of Insurance, Attorney General's office, all of those agencies are funded out of general revenue or an alternative funding stream. There's a small, I think, $3 million portion through the Texture program through TDI is the only things coming out of Fund 6 other than for asphalt and road improvements. That's a good step. That's about $1.2 billion over the biennium, and that, again, that ends diversion. Don't let anybody tell you that how we fund education is a diversion. That was part of the constitutional authorization back in 1946, coupling funding education to funding our highways. They get a nickel, they get a fourth or a nickel of the current 20% tax. 15 cents goes into Fund 6. That's not going to change. I don't consider that as a diversion. We have to be careful, going back to John's comment and your question about the sales tax. I think there's a causal connection between the sale of motor vehicles and the use on our roads. There is a connection. And so the idea that we take a portion of the growth over a base limit, I think has some appeal. But anytime you talk about issues like this, you got to think about taking money out of my left pocket and moving it to my right pocket and then telling people you fixed the problem. Because you're not fixing the problem. you're simply taking money out of one pocket and moving to another. Sales taxes fund our schools. Sales taxes funds our prisons. Sales taxes funds our Medicaid program. Sales taxes fund essential government services. I prefer a pay-as-you-go approach to funding our roads. It's not a constitutional right to use roads here in Texas. I think it ought to be a user fee. And so we have gotten away from a pay-as-you-go system. We've used your credit card, and we built a lot of roads and interchanges, but now we've got to pay that back. And I think $2.5 billion in this biennium is going to be used to pay back debt and interest for road usage. So the discussion ought to be proper in how we pay for roads. And so that's going to be a lively discussion. So when you hear about sales taxes and you hear about dedicating sales taxes to one purpose, you ought to think about what's going to happen. How do I fund my prisons? I can't charge people to be in prison. I can't charge kiddos to go to school. I can't charge the actual cost to fund somebody in a nursing home. So pay attention. This should be I see my colleague, Patricia Harless, who's a strong transportation advocate, and she took some very strong and principled steps last session to address funding as you go. So hopefully we'll have that discussion again this session.
Well, Mr. Otto, would you care to opine about how much of the motor vehicle sales tax may wind up funding roads?
I have not seen the bill. I understand, I think Senator Nichols had one last session and filed something similar. My understanding is what they're looking
$2.5 billion, I believe.
Yeah, it's the growth though, as I understand it, in
Anything over $2.5 billion.
anything over $2.5 billion. What comes in currently? I'm
4.3.
4.3, so you're slicing off a couple of $1 billion. You know, obviously, this session, we can backfill that with available revenue and it's no problem. But you've just taken away the discretion that when we're not in good times, when we don't have the sales tax coming in, do I go take that money from education? Do I go take it from Health and Human Services? Where do I get it?
Well, but I mean, if the vehicle is that money over $2.5 billion that comes in, then that would be the only amount of money that would be funded going forward, wouldn't it? So therefore, it wouldn't increase the drain on the Treasury in other areas. Is that not correct?
Well, my understanding was this was going to be a growing source of revenue for roads, otherwise.
Well, but I mean, it would be if the motor vehicle sales tax approved, but it wouldn't be if not. Is that correct?
No, I mean, if you're talking about out of the total we get, they're only gonna take a certain dollar amount.
Right.
And it's fixed, then, you know, the only question is, again, my only concern as someone who served on appropriations for 4 sessions, is you're taking away my discretion.
Right. Well, I thought, I mean, I don't want to argue the point, but I thought it was the money that came in for motor vehicle sales tax above $2.5 billion would go to roads. Therefore, if you had a year where the sales wasn't there, then you would have less money going to roads.
But again, that creates a problem with how TxDOT uses available revenue sources to plan 10 years out. You don't build a road the next
Right.
year.
You're right.
Or the next year in the biennium. You build roads 10 years out. You've got to buy right of way. You have to do environmental study, feasibility studies. Roads take 10 years or more to plan, to put out for contract, and to actually build the road. So in order for TxDOT to do that, they have to have a stable supply stream of income to plan. Now, while sales taxes on automobiles should stay over 2.5, but we've seen it where it's been less than $2.5 million during the recession, 2008. So it is not a stable stream of money, and therefore it's not an appropriate planning mechanism for long-term road funding in the future.
Dr. Zerwas?
Yeah, no, I just agree completely with Chairman Darby on this. I think what we're really trying to look at, and perhaps this is what I would call a sustainable revenue stream to help us build our roads in a responsible way. And I think a big part is exactly that explanation. This isn't money that is going to help us take care of it, for the next 2 years and stuff. We've got to think way down the line. And I think as we have this discussion, having that in mind and thinking about, okay, what is a more sustainable source of revenue that we can responsibly build our transportation needs on? that I think will generate a lot of conversation, you know, different ideas that's brought to the table. But at the end of the day, I think we need to look at what is going to be there, even when we see the economy kind of go up and down to some extent. You know, I mean, everything's affected when that happens, but there are perhaps some things that might